Joining us to discuss the reversal of democratic gains in West African sub-region and the peculiarity of the Franco-Phone country's situation within the region are Ambassador BULUS ZOMLOLO, a formal ambassador, a diplomat, a leadership development, peace and reconciliation expert with years of experience at the UN, UNESCO and ECOWAS. Ambassador, it's good to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Also joining us from Lagos is Professor David Aworawo, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, the head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. He specializes in strategic studies, international relations, political history, and development studies. Professor, welcome on the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
It's fantastic to have you. So, Professor Aworawo, what's your take? What's your take on these issues right now? We've had Mali, we've had Guinea, now Burkina Faso. What's really happening?
Well, what is happening is a reversal of democratic progress in West Africa, especially, but not limited to West Africa. I recall that in 2017 we have this development in Zimbabwe. Of course, we also since then we've had a flurry of military intervention in democratic process across Africa. And of course, West Africa is a focal point now. What is happening is a reversal of democratic gain, and it is very concerning. It's very concerning because one, we know that the military being in power, holding political office, is an aberration. The structure of the military, the way they are trained, is not well suited to civil governance. And of course, their records when they were in power from the 1963 down to the 70s when they were in power was disastrous. It is true that some people are jubilating now that the military has come into power and moved non-performing or weak or ineffective leaders. Those ones don't know what is happening. They don't have, they probably are not old enough to know what happened when the military in power in the 60s and 70s. And so it is something that is very troubling that the military, something that and the AU need to do a lot more to ensure that they stem the tide. As for why it is happening in mostly former French colonies, there is nothing peculiar about former French colonies. It's just a domino effect. When it happens in one country and is successful, other countries, or the military in other countries tend to be, encouraged to want to also do same in their respective countries. Don't be surprised if former British colonies, countries that were colonized by Britain, also begin to, follow suit. There is nothing peculiar. It is the fatigue. Those countries are fragile. The democratic process is not strong. And if you look at the trend, there has been two things. First, where we have had insurgents very active, terrorists very active, violence causing dislocation, economic disempowerment, refugees, and I don't know, when intense. That's where these things have happened. And secondly, where countries are changing constitution to elongate their stay in office. In addition to where the leadership has not been effective, has not met the needs of the people. These are places where the military has looked for an excuse to come to power. So these are issues that need to be addressed, really. When the country's leadership is trying to elongate itself in power by changing the constitution, it's a coup on itself. When elections are reached, it is like a coup in itself. So these are the early warning signs that ambassador, and of course, like I said before, the ECOWAS and AU need to do more than just condemning and some sanctions here and there, to be able to ensure that democratic gains are deepened, expanded, instead of the reversal that we're having now. So these are the issues
All right. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. So,
arrangements are concerned.
thank you very much, Prof. So, Ambassador, back to your thoughts. You were talking about the issues of peace management and the warning signs.
Right. Well, basically, like I said, the way a country manages its domestic circumstance matters a lot. And very often you see that the tensions that do arise because one group will feel aggrieved or neglected, another will feel entitled to certain privileges and will want to perpetuate those. And so if you bring demand from a section that feels hard done by, and another group that feels it is their birthright to do what they do and must have it the way they want it, there's bound to be conflict. And this is what governance is aimed at addressing. A country that manages its opportunities and challenges well will take care of the needs of its citizens. But one that doesn't, and you can see that always when people are given reasons for, say, the military to come in, corruption will be one of them, marginalization, abuse of power, abuse of human rights, and the rest of it, all meted out not to foreigners, but the very citizens of the country where the government is supposed to take care of. And so how a government responds to the needs of its citizens is important. Now, why have we had, and I said earlier on that there have been two dominant parties. The military is one party, trained and equipped to mete out violence. Civilians, on the other hand, who are supposed to be the custodians of democracy, are not good at respecting and deepening a culture of democracy on the continent.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just come in because of something you just said, and I want to ask, what happens to men in power? You see a civilian man goes in, loving his people, he goes into power, and suddenly he begins to act like he is king, he is God, he is above the people. What happens? You've been in politics, you've been in power, you've talked with people internationally in committees. What happens? What makes that transition?
It's a combination of factors, I must say here. Take Nigeria, for instance. We tend to worship people in power, make them feel more important than they are supposed to be. When you campaign on a platform, on a manifesto to serve the people. But the minute you come into office, you expect the people to serve you. And unless you are humble and smart enough to say, look, I'm here because the people want me to be here, you get carried away. You are surrounded by so much protocol, enormous power with very little accountability. And because the people have not learned to demand for their leaders to be accountable to them. And in the name of accountability, you can actually go and say, listen, you promised A, you've not delivered. And instead, I was talking earlier on too about what? A group may come around you and fit you with things that will tempt you to lose your sense. Whereas your responsibility to all and sundry. The constitution that governs the administration of every country is often abused. And so largely, therefore, before you know it, you are elected into an office and you suddenly feel you are bigger
than the office and the people. All right, Professor, I'm going to ask, we just heard what he said. In this latest incident, we've heard the fact that some people were protesting the lack of security, the advancement and the wanton killing by the jihadists. And some of them were arrested, some of them were beaten up, some of them were shot at, and they were chased away. And eventually the military took over, and this is part of their justification for taking over. What do we say to these things? What can we do? Because we're tired of cutting branches. How do we get to the root cause of these things? How do we get African leaders who are democratically elected to behave like democratic leaders, to lean on independence, just one term in office and move forward?
Well, a whole lot of things that are required. Studies have been carried out regarding countries that have experienced coups. I mean, what are the conditions that will exist that you will expect a coup to take place? And what are the conditions that will exist that you expect a civil war to break out? Studies have been conducted. We have conducted studies, and scholars over the years have conducted studies on this. It is interesting, to know that when a government is fragile, when a government is not capable of providing security for its people, is one of those fundamental reasons why a country may experience, a military coup and may also descend into civil conflict. So what needs to be done is that governments need to understand that a major reason why they are voted into office and what they are elected into office is to provide security. In addition to those other things that citizens are expected to enjoy from a government. So these are things that leaders need to understand. That a leader is not just a leader by sitting down and warming the seat. The provision of security is one fundamental thing for which a government, but one of the most important things for which a government exists. And leaders must understand this, that if that is not provided, you either have civil unrest, or you have a military coup, or you have a civil war. So in bodies like ECOWAS and EU, attention must be paid to members, heads of states who are members of these bodies, we need to be reminded all the time of the need to pay attention to all this. And then at another level, the root cause, you talked about the root cause. Of course, two things. There are people who are greedy, who are making demands of things they are not entitled to. The government needs to, ensure that the military is strong enough to be able to deal with those such troublemakers. And there are also those who have been engaged in these things because they want to meet some needs here and there, like bandits and all that. At that level, paying attention to human security is critical. When the basic needs of people are met, the tendency to want to take to violence to be able to meet those needs will reduce. Which is why in recent times, scholars have paid attention to human security as one of those things that attention must be paid to. If a country would reduce to the barest minimum the tendency towards, terrorism, banditry, and the rest of them. So the government's ability to provide the, basic needs of people. One scholar, Edward Azar, calls those needs ontological and non-negotiable. Once those basic needs are not met, people will tend to want to resort to all kinds of things, violent acts, to be able to meet them. So, which is also why countries where those needs are provided, where the standard of living, the quality of life is high, you hardly see these things happening there. Those are the root causes, things that.
All right, thank you, Prof.
West Africa.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. So we'll continue on that. Ambassador, let's take it to the next. Let's take it to ECOWAS, the ECOWAS angle. In these cases, people have accused ECOWAS of, well, first, not doing enough. When they act too high-handedly with overbearing sanctions, not acting democratically enough. Some have even accused them of being influenced by international forces. Now, what's your take?
It may be all of those or also none of them.
Okay.
In a way. When you talk of ECOWAS being overbearing in applying sanctions, that's because it is consistent with ECOWAS's protocol on democracy and governance.
Okay.
We also have the African Charter on democracy, elections, and governance. All two instruments have a provision and they emphasize constitutionalism.
Okay.
They also emphasize democracy. Okay. That's why, in fact, you see the word democracy featuring in both the African Charter and then the ECOWAS protocol. But I have seen a gap somewhere in both when it comes to implementation.
Okay.
The African Union does not have a mechanism to punish wrongdoing.
Okay.
So also does ECOWAS. And when we talk of sanctions being applied on individuals, on institutions, how effective are these sanctions?
Okay.
In the case of the African Charter, it is provided that any group or any individual who participates in unconstitutional change of government should be punished. We have yet to see a situation where, say, a military officer who took part or takes part in a coup leaves office and is held accountable
for what he did.
I made that point about accountability earlier, but let me link it to some of the causal factors. When you have a government that is not responsive and responsible, what room do the people have to challenge such a government?
True.
So the issue of impunity feeds on instability. Okay. And so long then as ECOWAS has not been able, the African Union has not been able to enforce its own instruments, those who are in a position to take over power illegitimately, or leaders that manipulate their national constitutions, as we saw in Guinea. For goodness sake, can't there be a response to such action? Meaning, if you have an early warning system, what is your enforcement capacity and capability? In my view, the day and the moment that ECOWAS, as the African continent itself, will be in a position to move into a country to fix an internal situation without destabilizing the polity, that will be the time that we will see a gradual end and sustainable democracy.
Okay. Thank you. Professor, I'm going to ask now, moving it on further to more the international scene. In Mali as well as in Burkina Faso, we see some familiar threads. One of them is the insecurity that we've talked about in both countries, facing the jihadists. The second one is French involvement. And the third is Russia seeking to give military aid to both of these countries, both of the militaries, and eventually we see a resultant military coup. Are we dealing with a situation where a renewed international Cold War of some sort, and Africa has become the battleground for a proxy war? Is this something deeper than we see on the surface?
Unfortunately, yes, that's what we are witnessing. Some of these leaders have had support from, have had some Western power, some industrialized countries, and that has encouraged them, that has emboldened them. For instance,
I think we're having some technical.
In the case of Burkina Faso,
okay. Oh dear, we're having some technical. So, Ambassador, I'd like to put that same question to you.
Well, yes, there is a proxy war going on in Africa.
Yes.
And our continent remains a sick continent of sort, given that internally we do not have the capacity where yet, we didn't go through the Green Revolution. And so our ability to feed ourselves has been challenged over time. But as it is today, the war that is going on in Africa may not be of a physical kind, where the powers that be are playing. You mentioned Russia earlier on. In many places across this continent today, you have Russian mercenaries operating as freelancers.
Okay.
So long then as they are free to operate on the continent, being paid good money, they themselves would like to cause conflict. Why? Because they are gaining from the ongoing conflicts. But then, we as Africans have not woken up to the fact that we are victims on two ends.
Okay.
When our leaders fail us, we look to outsiders to help resolve our own conflicts. But we ourselves are also exposing and creating this vulnerability that puts us at the mercy of outsiders.
Wow.
Take a family. You are a parent with children. Your children are fighting. You are not able to help them, but you call an outsider. That outsider sees something in your family that he wants. He will go to every extent to encourage the conflict to continue, so that he will surreptitiously take what he's interested in. And that's what is happening today in our continent, that Africa is blessed, but unfortunately, we are at the mercy of the international community.
Thank you. Prof, can you hear me now? Okay, so same question we're asking. Sorry, your thought, we cut you off in the middle of your thought. You just have about 2 minutes or so.
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I was saying we cut you off in the middle of your thought. Could you just round that up in about a minute or so?
Yes, I will. I certainly will. Yes, I agree with the ambassador's thoughts on this, that Africa is proxy wars is a theater of for proxy wars. Unfortunately, these days we have Russia waxing strong. Russia, in fact, those who took over Burkina Faso were emboldened by Russia, because they had discussions, as we came to understand, with the some individuals and government officials in Russia who are now congratulating and identifying with them. Of course, France is also there trying to also push its way back, not wanting to be pushed out. So neo-colonialism continues to fester across Africa, and that is an issue that attention needs to be paid to. I think ECOWAS and the AU need to do much more than they are doing now. They need to be able to confront these destabilizing forces from outside the continent, because as long as they continue side against another, we have this kind of condition that we're having now. In this age of globalization, in this age of multilateralism, we should have gone beyond this, where one country will just encourage one group within a country to overthrow government so that for its own personal gain. Unfortunately, that is what we have had across Africa. But if you look at those countries where the democratic tradition is strong and is expanding, there is no space for these elements to come in. It is those countries that are fragile where these things are happening. And like I said before, the AU and ECOWAS need to do a lot more to confront these countries so that collectively, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, the African continent can continue to make progress and, of course, development for all the countries on it.
Much, Professor Aworawo. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Ambassador Bulus, it's also been fantastic gleaning from your wisdom and the things that you know. You heard it here. It's very clear. The greatest deterrent to military coup is simply good governance. If everybody feels happy with the government, if these kind of things happen, the masses will come out on the street and they will protect the democracy. Now, Africa is rising, and it's time for you to get on board and be part of that rising and not pull her down. My name is Reward and Akirapo. This is Lensonafrica. We say see you same time next week. Have a good one.